Chapter 1. The Birth of Atlantis. Long ago, in a time that almost feels like a dream, there was a city. Its name was Atlantis. It wasn't just any city. No, Atlantis was like nothing the world had ever seen. It stood proudly, right in the heart of the great ocean, far from any other land. The waves of the sea would crash against its strong walls, but Atlantis stood tall, shining like a jewel under the sun. Its beauty was unmatched. Its buildings were so incredible, they seemed to reach up into the sky. The people who lived there? Oh, they were special. They were more than just ordinary men and women. They were builders, creators, thinkers. They built bridges over rivers, towers that touched the clouds, and gardens that grew plants from every corner of the earth. Some said the air in Atlantis even smelled sweeter than anywhere else. But it wasn't just beauty that made Atlantis so famous. The people were intelligent, so skilled that they became known for their science and trade. They created tools and machines that others could only dream of. They knew how to make life easier, how to build things no one had ever seen before. Ships, large and fast, would leave the shores of Atlantis and sail to distant lands, bringing back treasures and knowledge. People in faraway places whispered the name of Atlantis with both wonder and envy. And yet, despite all its power and greatness, Atlantis was also a peaceful city. For many years, life there was calm. No wars, no danger. The people lived happily. Families would gather under the stars. Children would play in the streets, and music filled the air every night. It was as if nothing could go wrong. But as time passed, things began to change. Small things at first. The once clear skies started to darken. Just a little. The waves that used to gently touch the shores began to grow larger. But the people of Atlantis didn't worry. After all, their city had always been strong. What could possibly happen to them? They were safe in their beautiful, rich home, surrounded by their amazing inventions. Nothing could touch them, or so they thought. One day, the leaders of Atlantis gathered in the largest hall of the city. The walls of the hall were covered in shining gold, and the floor was made of pure white stone. They sat at a long table talking about their future. Some of them wanted to build more cities. Others wanted to explore new lands, to expand their power across the seas. "Why stop now?" they asked. "We are the strongest city in the world." But not everyone agreed. Some of the wise men in Atlantis felt something dark in the air. "Perhaps we should be careful," one of them said softly, his voice echoing in the great hall. "We've done so much. Maybe we should protect what we have and not ask for more." The others laughed at him. "Protect? From what?" they asked. "We are Atlantis. No one can stop us. No one can challenge us." And so, the decision was made. Atlantis would not stop. It would grow bigger, stronger. But the wise man, sitting quietly in the corner, knew something that the others didn't. He felt it deep in his bones. Atlantis was not as invincible as they thought. In the months that followed, the city became even richer. More ships sailed from its shores, and more treasures arrived. The streets became busier. The buildings grew taller. But the weather began to change. The winds grew stronger. The sea became rougher. And deep beneath the city, where no one could see, something was stirring. At night, the people of Atlantis would look out over the ocean. They saw the stars, bright and beautiful. But they also began to see something else, something darker. The waters seemed restless, as if something was waiting below. Some of them felt it too, but they didn't speak about it. How could they? This was Atlantis. Nothing bad could happen to such a perfect place, but soon they would find out how wrong they were. One day, a loud sound shook the entire city. It was like the roar of 1,000 storms all at once. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Buildings, once so strong and proud, began to crack. People ran to the streets, looking around in confusion, in fear. What was happening? Was this a nightmare? The leaders gathered again in the great hall, their faces pale, their voices shaking. They had no answers. For the first time in their lives, they felt powerless. The ground kept shaking. The seas rose higher and higher. It was as if the city itself was falling apart. The people of Atlantis were scared. They had never felt fear like this before. The once peaceful city was now full of panic. But where could they go? Atlantis was surrounded by the ocean. There was no escape. In the days that followed, the shaking continued. The sea, wild and fierce, began to rise against the walls of Atlantis. Waves crashed into the city with a force they had never seen. The streets that were once full of laughter and joy now echoed with cries for help. But it was too late. Atlantis, the city of dreams, was being swallowed by the very ocean that had once protected it. Piece by piece, the city sank. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled into the water. The people who had once lived without fear were now fighting for their lives. But there was no way out. The city was lost. And so Atlantis, the greatest city the world had ever known, disappeared beneath the waves. Some say it still lies there, deep under the sea, waiting to be discovered. Others believe it is gone forever, a lost memory of a time when humans reached too far. But one thing is certain, the story of Atlantis will never be forgotten. Its rise and its fall serve as a reminder to us all. No matter how great we become, we are all connected to the earth and the sea, and they can take it all away in a moment. Chapter 2. A City of Wonders. Atlantis was no ordinary city. No, it was a place of beauty, a place of power, a city that shone like gold under the sun. It stood proudly, with large gleaming buildings that reached toward the sky. From the moment you stepped inside its walls, you could feel it. This was not just any city. This was Atlantis, a city of wonders. The streets were wide and smooth, paved with stone and lined with trees that danced in the wind. The air was fresh and the people were full of life. They walked through their city with pride, knowing they lived in a place like no other on earth. Everywhere you looked, there was something incredible to see. Sparkling fountains, grand statues, and parks so green and full of flowers that they seemed like pieces of paradise. But it wasn't just the beauty of Atlantis that made it special. No. The people, too, were remarkable. They were not only builders, but also creators. Their hands worked with stone, metal, and wood, shaping them into things of wonder. The ships they built, oh, those ships, were the fastest, strongest vessels the world had ever known. They sailed to every corner of the earth, bringing back goods from far-off lands, treasures that dazzled the eyes. Silk from the east, gold from the south, spices that filled the air with rich scents. Atlantis was not just a city. It was a center of the world. And its markets, oh, the markets! They were alive with activity, buzzing with the sound of traders' voices and the laughter of children. Long tables stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with food, fabrics, and jewels from every land. The people of Atlantis traded with everyone, and they always returned home with something new, something wonderful. Yet, Atlantis wasn't only about wealth. No, it was also a place of knowledge. It was a city of thinkers, inventors, and dreamers. In the great halls of the city, scholars gathered to share their ideas, to learn from one another, to discover new things. They studied the stars, the earth, the sea, always reaching for more. They invented machines, tools that made life easier, smarter. Some said they even had flying machines. Imagine that. It was as if anything was possible in Atlantis. The people knew how to bring clean water from the mountains. Water flowed through the streets in small channels, fresh and clear, providing life to every corner of the city. It was a place where everything worked perfectly. It seemed like nothing could go wrong in Atlantis. Surrounded by strong, tall walls, Atlantis was protected from the outside world. But the walls didn't just protect. They showed the strength of the city. From the top of these walls, one could see for miles, out to the horizon where the ocean met the sky. And beyond the walls, the harbors of Atlantis were always busy, filled with ships coming and going, bringing back stories of adventure, of discovery. But there was more. Always more. The people of Atlantis loved beauty, and their city reflected that. Inside the grand halls were the most beautiful works of art. Paintings, sculptures, carvings. They filled every space, telling the story of their city, of their people. And the gardens. The gardens were like something out of a dream. Flowers from every land bloomed there, filling the air with sweet, exotic smells. Trees with fruit so rich they seemed almost magical grew in every corner. The people of Atlantis could walk through these gardens for hours, feeling the peace, the joy of their perfect world. At night, Atlantis was even more magical. As the sun set over the ocean, the city would glow. Lights, soft and golden, lit up the streets, casting long shadows against the buildings. Music filled the air, gentle, warm sounds that drifted from the homes of musicians. People gathered in the squares, dancing, singing, celebrating life in the city they loved. It was as if the city itself was alive, filled with energy, filled with joy. And yet, beneath all this beauty, all this perfection, there was something else, a quiet feeling, a whisper in the back of the mind. It was as if the city was too perfect, too powerful. Could such a place really last forever? Could a city so rich, so full of life never face danger? No one asked these questions out loud. No one dared. After all, this was Atlantis. Nothing could touch it. Nothing could break the happiness of the people who lived there. Or so they believed. But even as they continued to build their city higher, even as they created more incredible inventions, something was changing. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. A crack, deep beneath the surface. The ground seemed less steady. The sea, once so calm, started to grow louder. The winds blew just a little stronger each day. But the people of Atlantis didn't notice. They were too busy, too happy to see the signs. They believed their city would stand forever. A city of wonders, a city of dreams. How could it ever fall? But as we know, nothing lasts forever. Not even Atlantis. And so, while the people danced in their streets, while their ships sailed across the seas, and while their great minds dreamed of new inventions, the city's fate was slowly being written. It was a fate they could not see, a fate that would change everything. For Atlantis, the city of wonders, was living on borrowed time. Chapter 3. The Rulers of Atlantis. In Atlantis, power rested in the hands of its rulers. They were not just kings, they were wise men, trusted and respected by all. They had the strength to lead and the wisdom to guide. For years, these rulers worked for the good of their people, making decisions that brought peace and prosperity to the city. They ruled from tall, grand palaces, their windows overlooking the bustling streets and the shining waters of the ocean. Every day, they gathered in a great hall to discuss the future of Atlantis. How can we make the city even greater, they would ask. They thought not only about the present, but also about the years to come. They wanted Atlantis to thrive, to become the most powerful city in the world. And so they made plans. Big plans. The leaders built strong armies with soldiers trained to defend the city against any threat. The walls of Atlantis were already tall and strong, but with an army behind them, no one dared attack. The people felt safe, safe to live their lives, safe to build their futures. But the rulers knew it wasn't enough just to protect their own land. No, they wanted to keep the trade routes open. Ships needed to move freely, carrying goods from Atlantis to distant lands and bringing back treasures from across the seas. This trade made the city rich, and as Atlantis grew wealthier, so did its rulers. Each year, more ships sailed out from the ports of Atlantis, and each year the rulers became more confident. "We are the greatest," they declared. "No one can match our power. No one can stop us." They felt invincible. Every decision they made seemed to bring more success. The markets were full of gold and jewels. The storehouses overflowed with food. Life in Atlantis was good, very good. But with power, something else grew: pride. The rulers of Atlantis, once so wise and careful, began to change. At first it was subtle. They no longer discussed the well-being of their people as much. Their conversations shifted from how to protect their city to how to make it bigger. "There is more out there," they would say. "More land, more riches, more to take." The rulers, who had once been satisfied with the greatness of Atlantis, now wanted more. They looked beyond their city walls, toward the lands across the sea. They saw fertile lands ripe for the taking. And the desire for control began to grow. It wasn't enough to have the richest city in the world. No. They wanted to control everything. "Imagine," one of the rulers said, his voice full of excitement. "Atlantis not just a city, but an empire. We can expand, we can conquer." And so the idea took root. The rulers began to send their armies out, first to nearby islands, then to faraway lands. They took what they wanted, expanding the reach of Atlantis further and further. At first, it seemed to work. The armies were successful. The rulers sent back messages of victory, of new lands brought under Atlantis's control. The people cheered. "Our rulers are the strongest," they cried. "Atlantis will rule the world." But something had changed. The rulers, who had once been wise and careful, were no longer thinking about what was best for the city. They were thinking only about power. The leaders, who had once listened to their advisors and cared for their people, now ignored all warnings. Some of the older, wiser men of Atlantis began to worry. They could see where this hunger for control was leading. "Should we not be cautious?" one advisor asked, his voice soft, almost fearful. "We have grown too fast. We are expanding too quickly." But the rulers dismissed him. They were too focused on their next conquest. "Caution?" one ruler scoffed. "We are Atlantis. We are unstoppable." And so they continued. More armies were sent out. More lands were taken. But as Atlantis grew bigger, its heart began to shrink. The rulers became blind to the problems that were starting to appear. The trade routes that had once been so open and free were now full of conflict. The lands they had taken were not as easy to control as they had hoped. Rebellions started to break out. The rulers tried to send more soldiers, but the more they fought, the harder it became. The pride that had once driven them was now turning into something else. Fear. Fear of losing what they had gained. Fear that their empire, built so quickly, was starting to crack. Back in Atlantis, the people began to notice. The markets were still full, but there was a tension in the air. Soldiers marched through the streets more often. The once peaceful city felt different. The laughter of children, the music in the squares. It was still there, but quieter, more distant. As if the city itself knew something was wrong. And the rulers, they were no longer the wise men they had once been. They had become rulers of war. They spent more time planning their next attack than they did thinking about their people. They no longer saw the beauty of Atlantis. They no longer cared about its wonders. All they cared about was holding on to the power they had seized. But power is a dangerous thing. The more you have, the more you fear losing it. And the rulers of Atlantis were about to learn that no empire, no matter how great, can last forever. In their pride, they had reached too far, and now they stood on the edge of something they could not control. The rulers had forgotten what made Atlantis great in the first place. They had forgotten that a city's strength doesn't come from how much land it controls, but from the wisdom of its leaders and the happiness of its people. And so, as the rulers of Atlantis looked out over their vast empire, they did not see the cracks forming beneath their feet. They did not hear the quiet warnings of their advisors or feel the shift in the air. They only saw their next conquest. But soon, very soon, they would learn. The city they had worked so hard to build, the empire they had fought so fiercely to create, was not as strong as they thought, and the fall of Atlantis was closer than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 4, Ambition and Expansion. Atlantis was not satisfied, no longer. The leaders of the city, once content with their power and wealth, now wanted more. More land, more control, more glory. They had already built the greatest city on earth, but now they dreamed of ruling the entire world. The grand ships of Atlantis, made of the finest wood, their sails white and strong, set out across the oceans. They sailed toward new lands, to distant shores no one had ever seen before. The leaders believed these lands would be easy to conquer, that they would fall before the might of Atlantis. They were sure of their success. After all, they had never failed before. Why should this time be any different? And so, their armies grew. Every year, more men were trained to fight, to protect the ever-expanding borders of Atlantis. The leaders wanted to show their strength to the world. They built fortresses in the lands they conquered, great stone walls that seemed unbreakable. They filled their treasure houses with gold, silver, and jewels from every corner of the earth. Atlantis is unstoppable, they said. Nothing can stand in our way. But something had changed. In their search for power, the leaders of Atlantis began to forget what had made their city great in the first place. They had once been known for their wisdom, their fairness, their ability to lead with care. Now they were driven by ambition, by the need to control everything and everyone around them. The rulers, who had once cared for their people, now thought only of themselves. "More!" they cried. "We must have more!" The ships kept sailing, farther and farther from Atlantis. Each time they returned with new treasures, new riches. But the cost was growing. The armies had to fight harder. The lands they conquered were not as easy to control as they had thought. Rebellions began to rise in the lands they had taken. The people of these distant lands did not want to be ruled by Atlantis. They fought back, and each time the rulers had to send more soldiers, more ships to keep their empire intact. The people of Atlantis did not see it at first. Life in the city still seemed good. The markets were still full, the streets still busy. But there was an uneasiness in the air. The city, once so peaceful, began to feel tense. There were whispers in the corners of the markets, quiet conversations about the wars, about the lands far away that were causing problems for their leaders. But the rulers did not care. They were blind to the danger growing around them. They only cared about one thing: expansion. "We must conquer more," they said, their eyes shining with greed. "Atlantis is meant to rule the world." They believed their city was invincible. They believed they could never fail. But they were wrong. The leaders of Atlantis had pushed too far. They sent their armies to the farthest edges of the world, not realizing how far from home they had gone. The further they expanded, the weaker their grip became. And yet they still did not stop. They sent more soldiers, more ships, more resources, all in the name of power. The land itself seemed to grow restless. Storms began to brew over the seas where Atlantis once sent its ships so freely. The ocean, once calm and gentle, became wild and unpredictable. But the rulers did not see these signs. They were too focused on their goals. They believed that if they just pushed a little further, took a little more, then Atlantis would finally be the empire they had always dreamed of. The leaders forgot the peace they once had. They forgot the joy of the city's early days, when Atlantis was known for its beauty, for its knowledge, for its great achievements. Now, Atlantis was known for its armies, for its wars, for the lands it had taken by force. The people of Atlantis began to grow weary. The wars were costing more than just gold and silver. They were costing lives. Sons, fathers, brothers were being sent to fight in lands they had never seen, and many of them did not return. The people whispered among themselves, but still, they did not dare to speak out loud. After all, this was Atlantis, the greatest city in the world. Who would dare question its rulers? But deep down, a quiet fear began to grow. Could this all really last forever? Could Atlantis, as powerful as it was, keep expanding without breaking? The rulers, blinded by their ambition, could not see the cracks that were forming beneath them. They believed that power was all that mattered, that as long as they had more land, more riches, more control, they would be safe. But they had forgotten something important. In their quest for expansion, they had lost sight of the city they had once cherished. They no longer cared about the peace and happiness of their people. They only cared about their empire. And empires do not last forever. One by one, the lands they had conquered began to resist. The rulers sent more armies to crush the rebellions, but the more they fought, the more they lost. The farthest lands were impossible to control. The cities they had built in distant places began to fall. The soldiers, tired from endless wars, began to question their leaders. And the people of Atlantis, once so loyal, began to feel the weight of their rulers' mistakes. But still, the leaders pushed on. They could not stop. They could not admit defeat. They believed that if they just tried harder, fought more battles, sent more ships, they could still win. But Atlantis was no longer the city it had been. The leaders had taken it too far. Their ambition, once a source of strength, had become their greatest weakness. And so, while the city still stood tall, its walls still strong, the soul of Atlantis was crumbling. Piece by piece, the empire they had built was starting to fall apart. The rulers, however, did not see it. Not yet. They were too focused on their dreams of power to see the danger ahead. But soon, very soon, they would be forced to face the truth. Atlantis, the greatest city on Earth, was standing on the edge of its own destruction. Chapter 5. The First Signs. It began quietly, almost too quietly to notice. The people of Atlantis woke up one morning, just like any other day. The sun rose over the great city, lighting up the tall towers, the shining streets, but beneath the surface, deep below where no one could see, something had changed. The ground beneath Atlantis began to shake. At first it was small, just a tremor, a slight movement of the earth. Some felt it under their feet as they walked through the markets. They paused for a moment, confused, looking around. What was that? They wondered. But then it stopped, as quickly as it had begun. They shrugged, laughed a little, and continued with their day. After all, Atlantis was strong. A small shake couldn't possibly mean anything, right? But the Earth didn't stay quiet for long. Over the next few days, the tremors returned. Stronger this time. You could feel it. Feel the ground shift beneath your feet just for a moment. People began to notice. They whispered to each other as they gathered in the streets. "Did you feel that?" they asked, their voices low, their eyes filled with questions. Is it just the Earth? Or something else? Still, the leaders said nothing. Atlantis was unshakable. The rulers, proud as ever, believed the city could never be harmed. The tremors were just nature, just the Earth moving as it always had. There is nothing to fear, they assured the people. And for a while the city believed them. But the signs were only just beginning. The sea, once calm and peaceful, began to change. The waves grew larger, crashing harder against the walls of Atlantis. The fishermen, who knew the ocean better than anyone, were the first to feel it. They returned from their trips, their faces pale, their boats rocking violently in the docks. "The sea is angry," they said, their voices filled with worry. "Something is happening out there. Something we don't understand." And yet, the city kept moving. The markets bustled with trade. The ships continued to sail. The people of Atlantis lived their lives, laughing, working, celebrating. But under the surface, a quiet fear was growing. You could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm, waiting to break. Then one evening, the sky itself began to change. The air felt different, heavier. It was hard to explain. The sunsets, once so beautiful and golden, now seemed darker. The clouds moved in strange ways, swirling above the city like silent watchers. The wind, once gentle and warm, grew sharp and cold. The people noticed, but still, they didn't understand. How could they? How could they know what was coming? Some tried to ignore it. "It's nothing," they said, forcing smiles. "Just the weather, just the Earth. It will pass." But others felt something deep inside, a sense of unease they couldn't shake. They didn't speak it out loud, but in their hearts, they knew. Something was wrong. The tremors grew stronger. Each one seemed to last longer than the last. Buildings, once so solid and firm, began to creak. The walls of Atlantis, those towering walls that had stood for so many years, now seemed vulnerable. Cracks, small at first, appeared in the stone. The people of Atlantis noticed, but they told themselves it was just wear and tear, just the natural order of things. Atlantis is strong, they reminded themselves. It has always been strong. But the signs were everywhere. In the forests that surrounded the city, the animals began to act strangely. Birds flew in wild patterns, their calls louder, more frantic. The animals that once roamed peacefully now seemed restless, uneasy, as if they, too, could sense something was coming. The trees, tall and ancient, swayed more than they should have, even when there was no wind. And the sea? Oh, the sea. The waves now crashed against the shores with a power the people had never seen before. Sometimes, the water rose so high that it spilled over the walls, flooding the lower streets. Fishermen stopped going out to sea. It was too dangerous. "The water is unpredictable," they said. "It's not safe." But the rulers, confident in their power, refused to listen. "Atlantis is untouchable," they declared. "The city will never fall." But deep inside, some of them felt it too. That same creeping fear, that same uneasy whisper that seemed to rise with every tremor, with every wave. The leaders didn't want to admit it, but even they knew something was very, very wrong. And yet, life continued. The people of Atlantis still filled the streets, still laughed and danced in the squares, but their smiles were no longer as bright. There was a tension in the air, something you could almost taste, a feeling that grew stronger with each passing day. Some began to prepare. Quietly, without drawing attention, they gathered supplies, built stronger shelters just in case. Others, still blind to the danger, carried on as if nothing had changed. "Atlantis is strong," they said, over and over again, as if repeating the words would make them true. "Nothing can harm us." But the first signs were all around them. The ground trembled once more, stronger than before. People stumbled in the streets, grabbing onto walls, tables, anything to steady themselves. "What's happening?" they cried. But there were no answers, only more shaking. And when it finally stopped, a heavy silence fell over the city. A silence filled with fear. The city of Atlantis had always believed it could never fall. The people had trusted in their leaders, in their walls, in their wealth and power. But now that trust was starting to fade. The signs were growing stronger, the air was growing heavier, and deep inside the people knew the truth they didn't want to admit. Atlantis was changing. And this time, it wasn't for the better. Chapter 6. Warnings ignored. The signs were there, clear as day. But no one listened. The ground, once solid beneath the feet of the people of Atlantis, began to split. Cracks appeared, small at first, barely noticeable. The streets, paved with perfect stone, now had lines running through them like scars. Some looked down at the cracks and wondered, but they shook their heads and carried on. "Atlantis is strong," they told themselves. "This city will never fall." The damage grew. Buildings that had stood tall and proud for centuries now showed signs of weakness. Walls began to crumble, small pieces of stone falling to the streets below. Statues that once symbolized the city's greatness tilted just slightly, as if bowing to a force no one could see. And still, the people ignored it. After all, Atlantis had stood for so long. Surely this was just another problem to be fixed. But the cracks kept spreading. As the days passed, more buildings suffered damage. Some homes in the poorer parts of the city collapsed entirely, leaving families in shock, staring at the rubble. And yet, the leaders did not act. They saw the damage, yes, but they believed it was temporary, something that could be repaired. "We've fixed worse," they said with confidence. "Atlantis will continue to grow." And so, the people of Atlantis kept building. They continued their work, laying new stones, raising new structures, as if they could outbuild the problems beneath their feet. Markets were still filled with traders. Ships still sailed across the seas, and the streets bustled with life. The cracks in the earth were just that, cracks. Easily fixed, or so they thought. The sea, it too was sending warnings. The waves grew taller, stronger, slamming into the city walls with a force they had never seen before. Sometimes during the night, the water would rise so high that parts of the lower city would flood. But by morning, the waters would retreat, and life would go on as usual. People mopped up the mess, patched the walls, and convinced themselves that everything would be fine. But things were not fine. The earth, once calm and reliable, now seemed angry. Tremors shook the ground more frequently, rattling the windows and shaking the streets. Some of the tremors were so strong that they caused buildings to sway. "Just another quake," people whispered, nervously laughing it off. "It will pass." But deep down, they knew something was wrong. They just didn't want to admit it. For years, Atlantis had thrived. It had grown richer, stronger, more powerful than any city in the world. The leaders believed they had control over everything, the land, the sea, even the future. But now the future was slipping from their grasp. They could see the cracks in their great city, but they refused to see the bigger picture. They couldn't imagine that Atlantis could fall. But the signs were there, all around them. The ground beneath Atlantis continued to shift. Some roads were split wide open, deep enough to swallow a cart whole. Workers tried to repair the damage, filling the cracks with stone, but it was no use. The earth beneath was unstable, moving in ways they didn't understand. And still, they kept building, kept trading, kept expanding. "We'll fix it," the leaders said with confidence, though their voices were not as strong as they had been before. "Atlantis has faced problems before. This is nothing. We can handle it." But could they? People began to talk, quietly at first, in the markets, in the taverns, in the homes. There was fear, hidden beneath the surface of their daily lives. The city didn't feel as secure as it once had. The cracks in the streets, the tremors in the ground, the rising sea. It all seemed connected somehow. But the leaders, the rulers of Atlantis, refused to listen to these whispers. They were too focused on their plans, on expanding their empire, on gathering more wealth and power. In their eyes, Atlantis was too strong to fail, and so the warnings were ignored. The city continued to hum with life, even as the world beneath it started to come apart. The leaders, sitting in their grand halls, spoke of new trade routes, of new conquests, of building an even greater future for Atlantis. They didn't want to see what was right in front of them. But some could feel it. There was a tension in the air, something thick and heavy that weighed on the city like an invisible blanket. People began to notice how often the tremors came, how strong the winds had become, how strange the ocean looked, rising and falling like a living thing. The sea, once a friend to Atlantis, now seemed more like a threat. Still, the people pushed the fear aside. What else could they do? Atlantis had always been their home, their fortress. It had always been a city of strength, of power. How could they believe that it was in danger? But soon, they would have no choice. The cracks in the city were more than just breaks in stone. They were warnings. Warnings that something much bigger was coming. Something they couldn't fix. The ground, the sea, the sky, all seemed to be changing all at once. And yet the people of Atlantis carried on, believing, hoping that the problems would disappear, that they could rebuild, that their city, their beautiful, powerful city, would survive. But not everything can be rebuilt. Some problems are too big to fix. And the people of Atlantis were running out of time. Chapter 7. The day everything changed. And then, one day, it all changed. The sky above Atlantis was dark. Clouds hung low, heavy, as if the air itself knew what was coming. But the people of Atlantis, they didn't know. They went about their day just like any other. They walked the streets, filled the markets, worked in their shops and homes. The tremors had been stronger that morning, yes, but they had come to expect them. Just the earth moving, they told themselves. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It began with a sound, a deep rumbling growl, low at first but growing louder. The ground beneath the city started to tremble again. At first it was just a vibration, something small, almost gentle. But then the tremors grew stronger. The earth shook violently, like a great beast waking from a long sleep. The people of Atlantis stopped in their tracks. They looked around confused, eyes wide with fear. And then the ground split open. It started in the center of the city. a crack, sharp and sudden, ripping through the streets. Buildings shuddered, walls cracked, and the once solid ground began to break apart. The streets buckled and twisted as the earth beneath them seemed to give way. People screamed, grabbing onto anything they could, doorways, carts, each other. But there was no stopping it. The ground was opening up, wide and hungry, swallowing everything in its path. "Run!" someone shouted, their voice lost in the chaos. And run they did. Panic took over the city. People rushed through the streets, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wild. Mothers clutched their children, pulling them through the crowds. Traders abandoned their goods, leaving behind carts full of treasures as they tried to escape. But the cracks were spreading, faster than they could run. Buildings that had stood for centuries, strong and proud, crumbled into dust. Temples, markets, homes, all fell into the gaping holes that had opened beneath them. The sea. Oh, the sea was rising too. The waves grew larger, crashing harder against the city walls. What was once a gentle ocean now roared like a monster, angry and wild. The water surged, slamming into the docks, pulling ships from their moorings and smashing them against the rocks. The people of Atlantis had never seen the sea like this before. It was unstoppable, fierce, relentless, and then the walls began to break. Great sections of the city's mighty walls collapsed under the force of the water. The sea, once held back by the strength of Atlantis's defenses, now poured into the city. Streets that had once been full of life were now flooded with water, rising higher and higher with each passing moment. The people screamed as they tried to climb onto rooftops, onto higher ground, but there was no escape. The water was rising too fast. Atlantis, once the greatest city on Earth, was sinking. The land beneath it gave way, pulling the city down into the depths of the ocean. The sea flooded every corner, every street, every home. The people who had once lived without fear, who had believed their city was invincible, were now running for their lives. But there was nowhere to run. The earth shook again, harder this time, and the cracks spread even further. Parts of the city collapsed into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves. Towers that had once touched the sky now sank into the sea, swallowed whole by the deep. The streets, the markets, the palaces, all gone in an instant. People cried out for help, their voices lost in the roar of the ocean. Some tried to swim, but the water was too strong, the current too powerful. Others clung to pieces of debris, floating in the rising tide. But the sea showed no mercy. It pulled them under, one by one. And the city, the once great city of Atlantis, was sinking faster than anyone could have imagined. The waves crashed over the tallest buildings, drowning them in a torrent of water. The streets, the gardens, the parks that had once been so full of life were now silent, hidden beneath the surface of the ocean. The people of Atlantis, those who had survived the first tremors, watched in horror as their world disappeared before their eyes. In just a few moments, it was gone. Atlantis, the city that had stood for centuries, was no more. The land that had once held such power, such beauty, had sunk into the sea, leaving nothing behind but silence, and the endless, unforgiving ocean. The few who survived stood on the cliffs, far from the city's center, watching as the last towers of Atlantis disappeared beneath the waves. They wept, their hearts heavy with grief, their eyes full of disbelief. How had this happened? How had their great city fallen so quickly, so completely? But the answer didn't matter. It was too late. Atlantis was lost. The sea, calm now, covered everything. The sun began to set over the horizon, casting a golden light on the surface of the water. But beneath that surface, deep down in the darkness, the ruins of Atlantis lay, forgotten by the world above. And so, the city of Atlantis, once the pride of the world, became nothing more than a memory, a legend whispered by the few who had seen it fall. But the ocean remembers. It always does. Chapter 8. Swallowed by the sea. And then, it was gone. Atlantis, the city of wonders, had disappeared. The sea swallowed it whole. Where once there were towering spires, now there was only water. The streets that had echoed with laughter and trade, silent. The grand halls that had witnessed the rise of a great civilization, empty, buried deep beneath the ocean. The world above carried on, but Atlantis was lost forever. The sea covered everything. It rushed over the city like a blanket, pulling the stones, the statues, the lives into its depths. The once beautiful buildings, the wide streets, the bustling markets, all gone. Beneath the waves the city lay still, quiet, as if it had never been. The waters rose higher, faster than anyone could have imagined. The currents twisted and turned through the ruins of Atlantis, like silent ghosts moving through the remnants of a forgotten world, where children once played, where merchants once bargained, where rulers once planned their future. There was only darkness. The ocean, it took everything. It claimed the city for itself, pulling it into the deep, into the unknown. The towers that had once touched the sky now rested at the bottom of the sea, covered in sand and coral, hidden from the eyes of the world. The people who had lived there, the ships that had sailed from its ports, all were lost, buried beneath the weight of the ocean. And in time, the world forgot. Atlantis became nothing more than a story, a legend, a whispered tale of a city that had once been so great, so powerful, that it had challenged the very forces of nature, and lost. Some said it was a punishment for their pride. Others believed it was simply a tragedy, a city destroyed by the power of the sea. But no one truly knew. Atlantis, now lying beneath the waves, had taken its secrets with it. The ocean is a keeper of secrets. It holds onto the past, hides it away, so that the world above can move on. And that's what happened. The world moved on. New cities were built. New ships sailed the seas. New empires rose. But Atlantis was forgotten. Beneath the surface of the ocean, where the sun's light could no longer reach, the city slept. The grand palaces, once filled with life and energy, now stood in silence. Seaweed curled around the columns. Fish swam through the empty windows and the streets. The streets were buried under layers of sand. The people who had once walked those streets, who had built such a magnificent city, were gone. Their voices, their stories, their dreams, all swallowed by the sea. But sometimes in the quiet of the night, sailors would speak of strange things. Lights, seen deep beneath the water. Shadows that moved below the surface. Some believed that Atlantis was still there, alive in some way, waiting to be found. But no one ever dared to look too closely. The sea was dangerous, unpredictable, and it had already claimed Atlantis once. The ruins of Atlantis, hidden in the depths, became part of the ocean's landscape. Coral grew over the stone buildings. Fish swam through the remains of what had once been homes, marketplaces, temples. The city, once so grand, was now just another part of the deep sea, a place no one could reach, no one could see. The silence was overwhelming, the stillness endless. Years passed. Decades. Centuries. And yet, the story of Atlantis never truly disappeared. It lingered in the minds of those who had heard it. the tale of a city so powerful it believed it could never fall, and yet it had completely, utterly fallen. The sea had taken it, and the world had moved on. But the memory of Atlantis remained. It whispered through history, through the stories passed down from generation to generation. But the ocean kept its secret. The waves moved gently over the place where Atlantis had once stood, hiding what lay below. The sun would rise, the tides would shift, and the world above would continue. But deep beneath, in the cold, dark waters, Atlantis lay still, untouched by time, frozen in its last moments of glory and tragedy. The world had forgotten, but the sea never forgets. It holds on to its mysteries, its treasures, its ruins. It keeps them locked away, out of reach, out of sight. The once great city of Atlantis was now nothing more than a ghost, a memory, buried deep beneath the waves. The people who had lived there, who had built such an incredible place, were now part of the sea itself. Their voices were gone, their laughter silenced, but their story lived on. And maybe one day someone will find it again. Maybe one day the ocean will give up its secrets, and the ruins of Atlantis will rise once more, telling the world what was lost. But until then, Atlantis remains where it fell, deep beneath the ocean, swallowed by the sea. Forever. Chapter 9. A Lost Civilization. Who were they, really? The people of Atlantis? What were they like? Were they like us? Did they wake each morning to the warmth of the sun, smile at their children, dream of a better future? Or were they something else? Something more? The mystery of Atlantis is not just in the city that sank beneath the waves, but in the people who built it. Their lives, their thoughts, their dreams, all lost. But we wonder, who were they? They were not ordinary, that much is clear. The people of Atlantis were far beyond anything we can fully understand today. Their knowledge, their inventions, their brilliance, it's almost unbelievable. Stories say they knew the secrets of the earth and the stars, secrets we are still trying to uncover even now. Some believe they were masters of science and technology, creating machines and tools that we, even with all our modern advances, can only imagine. Imagine it, a world where anything seemed possible, a world where the sky was not a limit but an invitation. They studied the stars, some say, with a knowledge so deep, so advanced, that they could predict the movements of the heavens. They built great observatories, structures that allowed them to map the cosmos, to see what others could not. And the earth beneath their feet? They understood it in ways we have only begun to grasp. Some even believe they harnessed the power of the earth itself, controlling forces that we think of as untouchable. Earthquakes, volcanoes, even the ocean. But how? How could they have done it? What did they know that we do not? And yet, even with all their brilliance, they are gone. Their inventions, their wisdom, lost. Whatever it was that they mastered, whatever tools and machines they built, none of it could save them in the end. All that remains are stories, whispers of a civilization that was far ahead of its time, yet brought down by forces they could not escape. Did they know what was coming? Did they feel the ground tremble beneath them and realize, too late, that all they had built was slipping away? Or did they believe right up until the final moment that they would survive? That Atlantis would stand forever? We may never know. Their voices are silent now. But oh, how they must have lived. The art, the culture, the beauty of their world, it must have been something extraordinary. Atlantis was said to be filled with incredible works of art, statues carved from marble, paintings that captured the very essence of life, music that filled the air and echoed through the streets. They were creators, artists, dreamers. They built temples that touched the sky, palaces of shining stone, gardens that bloomed with flowers from every corner of the world. The people of Atlantis must have been proud, proud of what they had created, proud of the civilization they had built. But pride can be dangerous. It can blind you to the dangers around you, make you believe that you are untouchable. Were they too proud? Too sure of themselves? And what of their relationships? Did they love as we do? Did they laugh, cry, hope? Were their children running through the streets, playing beneath the great towers of the city? Lovers walking hand in hand by the water's edge, dreaming of their future together? Or were they so different, so advanced, that their lives were unlike anything we can imagine? These questions, they haunt us. But now those streets are silent. The statues have crumbled, the paintings have faded, and the music has stopped. The people of Atlantis, whoever they were, have vanished. Their stories unfinished. Their dreams unfulfilled. Their entire civilization gone. We try to piece together the puzzle, searching the depths of the ocean for clues. We dive into the waters, hoping to find a trace of them, an artifact, a relic, a piece of their world that might tell us more. But so far the sea has kept its secrets well. Atlantis remains hidden, buried beneath the waves, and with it, the lives of its people. But we can't stop wondering. Who were they? What did they leave behind? Did they leave behind anything at all? Some believe the people of Atlantis were more than just ordinary humans, that they were connected to forces beyond our understanding, that they had unlocked powers we can only dream of. Others believe they were simply ahead of their time, a civilization that rose too fast, too soon, and paid the price for it. But whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The people of Atlantis were remarkable. Their knowledge, their art, their vision of the world, they were far ahead of their time. And now, they are but shadows of a lost world. When we think of Atlantis, we don't just think of a city beneath the sea. We think of the people who lived there, the families, the rulers, the thinkers, the dreamers. We wonder what their lives were like, what they hoped for, what they feared. We wonder how they felt as the ground shook beneath them, as the sea rose higher and higher, as their world crumbled around them. Did they know in those final moments that they would be remembered, that they would become legends? Or did they fall into the ocean, believing they would be forgotten forever? Atlantis may be lost, but the memory of its people lives on. Their legacy is not in the ruins beneath the sea, but in the questions they leave behind. Questions we may never answer. But still, we wonder. Chapter 10. The search begins. The search for Atlantis. It never really ends. For centuries, explorers, adventurers, scientists, all have scoured the oceans, desperate for a glimpse of the lost city. It calls to them, whispers to them from beneath the waves, as if Atlantis itself wants to be found. But so far, it remains just beyond our reach. A dream, a mystery, waiting in the deep. The first searchers set sail long ago. Maps in hand, they crossed oceans, following every clue, every hint of Atlantis' location. They believed with all their hearts that they would be the ones to find it. They looked for ruins beneath the sea, for broken columns, for shattered statues. They dreamed of walking the streets of Atlantis, of standing where its people once stood. But they found nothing. Still, the search continued. It always does, because there is something about Atlantis, something that pulls us in, something we can't ignore. Is it the mystery of its sudden disappearance? The beauty of its forgotten civilization? Or perhaps the tragedy, The way it all ended in a single moment, swallowed by the sea. Whatever it is, we can't let it go. And so, more explorers took to the water. Some searched the Mediterranean, convinced that Atlantis must be hidden in the depths of that ancient sea. Others believed it lay in the Atlantic Ocean, far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, just as the old stories said. They dove deep into the waters, their eyes searching the darkness, their hearts full of hope. But again, Atlantis stayed hidden. Then came the scientists. They brought new tools, sonar, radar, submarines that could dive deeper than ever before. They mapped the ocean floor, scanning for any sign of the lost city. They studied ancient texts, hoping to find clues that others had missed. Some claimed to have found strange shapes beneath the water, ruins perhaps, or the remains of walls. But proof? Proof still eluded them. The oceans are vast, and they hold many secrets. Some say they've seen it. They speak of ruins deep beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows of the sea. "I've seen columns," one diver once claimed. "Broken pillars covered in coral. It must be Atlantis." Others swear they've found old maps, maps that point directly to the city's location. But when they go to those places, when they dive into the water, there's nothing there, only sand and silence. Atlantis is like a ghost, always close but never close enough to touch. Yet we keep searching. We cannot let it rest. There is something about Atlantis, its story, its mystery, that holds us captive. We want to know. We need to know what happened to that great city. How did it rise? How did it fall? Did it really exist at all? Or is it just a story, a legend passed down through the ages, a warning from history? Each new expedition brings hope. This time, they say, we will find it. This time, Atlantis will rise again. But each time the ocean keeps its secret. The waters are deep, dark, and full of mystery. Atlantis remains hidden. But still, the search goes on. There are many theories. Some believe Atlantis lies beneath the sands of the Sahara, buried under the desert instead of the sea. Others think it may be in the Caribbean, hidden among the islands. Some even say it could be in Antarctica, frozen beneath the ice. The theories are as wide as the oceans themselves, each one offering a new possibility, a new hope. But the truth remains elusive. Why do we search? Why, after all these centuries, do we still feel the pull of Atlantis? Maybe it's because Atlantis represents more than just a lost city. It represents possibility. The idea that there was once a civilization more advanced than our own, a place where knowledge and beauty were unmatched, a place where humans reached the peak of their potential before it all came crashing down. The search for Atlantis is not just a search for ruins, it's a search for answers, a search for understanding. We want to know what happened, yes, but more than that, we want to know why. Why did Atlantis fall? What went wrong? Was it simply the power of nature, or was there something more? Some flaw in the people, in their leaders, in the way they lived? Atlantis haunts us because its story could be our own. The explorers, the adventurers, the scientists, they aren't just looking for stones and statues. They're looking for a piece of history, a connection to something larger than themselves. They want to find Atlantis because, in finding it, they hope to learn from it, to discover what it means to build and what it means to fall. And so the search continues. Even now, in the modern age, the oceans are being scanned, the books are being studied, the maps are being drawn. The searchers still set out, with their technology and their courage, diving into the depths of the unknown. Will they find it? Will Atlantis finally reveal itself to the world? Perhaps. Or perhaps Atlantis will remain a mystery, a legend whispered by the waves, a story told by the sea. But we will not stop looking. Something about Atlantis calls to us, doesn't it? Its mystery, its beauty, its tragic end. We cannot let it rest. We must know what happened, and maybe one day we will. Chapter 11. Legends of the Deep. They say, the ocean never forgets. There are legends, whispers really, of strange things seen beneath the waves. Stories that drift from sailor to sailor, from fisherman to fisherman, growing with each telling. Some speak of lights, glowing beneath the surface of the water, moving slowly, silently, like stars trapped in the deep. Others tell of songs, soft and haunting, that rise from the ocean at night, filling the air with melodies so beautiful, so sad, that they make your heart ache. Could it be? The lost souls of Atlantis, still calling from beneath the sea. For centuries, these tales have circled through coastal towns, spreading across harbors and docks like the salty wind. Fishermen, returning late at night, swear they've seen things they can't explain. I was out there, one might say, his voice low, his eyes wide. The sea was calm, the moon high, and then I saw it. A glow, deep in the water, like nothing I've ever seen before. It was faint, but it was there, moving, slowly, as if the ocean itself was alive. Some scoff at these stories. It's just the reflection of the moon, they say, laughing it off. The sea plays tricks on the eyes. But others listen more closely. They nod, their faces serious, their eyes scanning the horizon. They know better. The sea is full of mysteries, and the lights, the songs, they feel real. There are those who believe that Atlantis is still there, that beneath the waves the city sleeps. It hasn't crumbled, hasn't disappeared. It waits. Some say the lights are not just reflections, but the glow of Atlantis itself, still alive, still breathing deep in the ocean. The city hasn't died, they whisper. It's calling out. It wants to be found. Could it be true? The stories don't stop with lights. Some speak of strange sounds heard at sea, far from the safety of the shore. On nights when the wind is still and the waves are gentle, a melody, soft but clear, rises from the depths. Sailors describe it as music unlike any they've ever heard. Not from this world. The notes drift up from below, gentle at first, but growing louder the closer they come to certain parts of the ocean. The sound wraps around you, fills the air, and for a moment, it feels as if the ocean itself is singing. Could it be the voices of Atlantis? The people of the lost city, their souls still trapped beneath the water, trying to reach the surface? It sounds like a song, one sailor described. A song of sorrow, as if something is mourning down there, under the waves. It's beautiful, but haunting. I felt it in my bones. The songs have no clear source, no instruments, no voices that can be traced, just the ocean, the deep, dark ocean. Some believe the sound is Atlantis itself, its ruins filled with life, still echoing with the voices of the past. Others think it's something else, something stranger, a signal, a cry for help, or perhaps a warning. Could it be that Atlantis is not just lost, but alive in some way we cannot understand? That its people, or what remains of them, are still there, reaching out from the other side of time, from beneath the sea, waiting for someone to hear their call? Or perhaps Atlantis is guarding something. A secret, too great, too dangerous to let the world above know. The legends grow with every telling, and with each tale, the mystery deepens. Sailors speak of ships that pass over certain parts of the ocean, parts believed to be where Atlantis once stood. Some claim their compasses spin wildly, unable to find true north. Others report strange things happening to their instruments, radars that go dark, radios that buzz with static. It's like the ocean doesn't want you there, one captain explained. like something's pulling you away, trying to keep you from getting too close. And then there are the disappearances. Ships, small boats, even large vessels have gone missing over waters said to hide Atlantis, vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no wreckage, just gone. Some believe these ships were unlucky, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, taken by the sea itself. But others think the answer lies below. Maybe Atlantis doesn't want to be found, they say. Maybe it's protecting itself, pulling anything that comes too close down into the depths to keep its secrets safe. The mystery of Atlantis refuses to fade. With every new generation, there are new stories, new witnesses. Some describe seeing figures, shadowy, ghost-like, beneath the surface of the water. "I swear," one diver said, "I saw a shape, a person or something like it moving just out of reach. It was there. And then it was gone, as if the ocean swallowed it whole." What could it be? Could Atlantis truly be more than just a sunken city? Could its people in some way still exist, beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered? Or waiting to protect their ancient world from being uncovered? The ocean is vast, its depths endless. And yet the stories continue. Stories of lights, of songs, of ships disappearing into nothing. The legends of the deep have survived for centuries. They grow with each passing year, with each new sailor who swears he saw something, heard something, felt something. Atlantis refuses to be forgotten. Maybe it's just a story. Maybe the lights are nothing more than the glow of fish. The songs just the echo of the sea. Maybe the lost city will never be found, because it was never there to begin with. Or maybe Atlantis is still out there. Maybe the sea keeps its secrets for a reason. Maybe the city waits in the dark and the deep, holding on to its mysteries, calling out to those who dare to listen. Chapter 12. Atlantis Reborn. And now we wonder, could Atlantis rise again? Is it possible? Could the great city, lost for so long, ever return? We've imagined it, haven't we? The towers breaking through the surface of the sea, shimmering in the sunlight. The streets, once buried beneath the waves, coming back to life. Atlantis, reborn. But is it just a dream? A hope that we hold on to, knowing deep down it may never happen? The ocean is vast. Its depths are unforgiving. What was taken by the sea may never be given back. Perhaps Atlantis is destined to remain forever lost. Still, we can't help but ask ourselves, what if? What if one day the waters part and the city of Atlantis rises again? Would we be ready? Could we understand its secrets, its power? Or would we make the same mistakes as those who came before? The story of Atlantis has always been more than just the tale of a lost city. It's a warning, a reminder of how fragile greatness truly is. A city so powerful, so advanced, thought it could never fall. And yet, it did. In the blink of an eye, it was gone, swallowed by the very sea that once surrounded and protected it. The rise and fall of Atlantis is a lesson for us all. Atlantis was a symbol of human achievement, of the heights that we can reach when we work together, when we push the limits of what's possible. But it was also a symbol of how quickly it can all slip away. Pride, greed, ambition. These are forces as powerful as the ocean itself. They build and they destroy. Perhaps it is not Atlantis that needs to rise, but the lesson it left behind. The people of Atlantis believed they could control everything. They thought their knowledge, their inventions, their wealth would protect them from any danger. But they were wrong. The forces of nature, of time, of fate, these are beyond our control. The line between greatness and destruction is thin. too thin, and Atlantis crossed it. It's a story that still speaks to us today. We live in a world of progress, of incredible technology, of endless possibilities. But we must remember, the higher we rise, the harder we fall. The story of Atlantis is a reminder that no civilization, no matter how great, is invincible. It is a warning that we must not forget. Atlantis fell, not because of the sea, but because of the choices its people made. Choices driven by pride, by the belief that they were untouchable. They reached too far, pushed too hard, and when the cracks began to form, they ignored them. They thought they had time. They thought they could fix it. But in the end, the city sank. And with it, all their hopes, all their dreams, disappeared beneath the waves. And now, the sea holds Atlantis, a silent guardian of its secrets. But the sea never forgets. It remembers. It remembers the rise, the beauty, the power of Atlantis. It also remembers the fall, the destruction, the day the city was pulled into the depths. The ocean is patient, eternal, watching as the world above continues to grow, to change. And maybe, just maybe, it whispers to us. It reminds us of what happened, of what could happen again. Could Atlantis rise again? Could its towers break through the water once more? Perhaps. But perhaps it's not the city itself that we should be looking for. Perhaps it's the wisdom we must find. Atlantis fell, but its story has lived on, passed down through generations, a cautionary tale that echoes through time. The question is, will we listen? Atlantis was great. It was powerful. But it was not eternal. Nothing is. And that is the lesson. We must remember that no matter how high we build, no matter how far we reach, there are forces greater than us. Forces that can take it all away, just as the sea took Atlantis. So as we dream of Atlantis, of what it might have been, of what it could still be, let us also remember its warning. The line between greatness and destruction is thin, and we walk it every day. Atlantis may never rise again. It may remain a legend, a mystery buried beneath the waves, forever lost to time. Or perhaps one day we will find it, its ruins, its stories, its people, still waiting to be discovered. But until then, we must carry its lesson with us. The sea never forgets, and neither should